My name is Michael Carter. I'm 42 years old and live in Denver, Colorado. I never imagined I would write these words. But now I know I have no choice. What I am about to share may be difficult for many to believe. But I assure you, it is the truth. I died. I crossed the boundary between life and death. And what I saw on the other side changed me forever. That day started like any other. I woke up early, stretched, and made myself a cup of coffee. The warmth of the mug in my hands felt familiar, comforting. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, checking emails, and mentally preparing myself for another long day at work. Everything seemed normal, routine. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air outside carried a strange weight to it. I couldn't explain it, but I felt off. A lingering sense of unease, like something was waiting just beyond my understanding. But I brushed it aside. Life was stressful. Maybe I was just exhausted. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, getting into my car like I did every morning. The drive was familiar, the same route I had taken for years. Traffic lights blinked in the distance. Cars rushed past me, and pedestrians walked along the sidewalks, lost in their own worlds. Yet, something felt different. I couldn't quite place it. But there was an unusual stillness in the air. The weight on my chest grew heavier. But I dismissed it. My mind was too occupied with the usual worries, bills piling up, work deadlines, the uncertainty of the future. I was deep in thought, lost in the monotony of my own concerns, completely unaware that my life was about to change forever. Then it happened. A sudden, excruciating pain shot through my chest, like a steel vise tightening around my heart. I gasped, but no air came. My vision blurred, and an unbearable pressure pressed against me, as if something was squeezing the very life out of me. Time slowed. The world around me moved in eerie slow motion. The cars, the buildings, the people, they all seemed distant, like a dream unraveling before my eyes. I tried to grab the steering wheel, but my limbs felt weak, disconnected from my mind. The sounds around me faded, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, darkness. I don't remember the moment my car lost control. I don't remember the impact, the screeching tires, or the crushing force of metal crumpling upon collision. But I remember the silence that followed. I remember lying on the cold pavement, staring up at the sky. The gray clouds hung motionless, as if time itself had paused. My body felt distant, weightless, as though I was no longer a part of it. I could hear distant voices, shouting, sirens, people running, but none of it felt real. It was like I was floating, detached from the scene playing out below me. A strange calmness washed over me. I wasn't scared. I wasn't panicked. The worries that had plagued me mere moments ago, the bills, the stress, the future, no longer mattered. Everything that had once seemed so important had simply vanished. Then, it hit me. I was dying. I floated above my body, watching the chaotic scene below unfold. The wreckage of my car was crumpled beyond recognition. People rushed toward me, their faces a mixture of shock and urgency. Paramedics arrived within moments, their voices urgent as they worked to stabilize what was left of me. I saw them place paddles against my chest, saw my body jolt from the force. But I felt nothing. I wanted to speak, to tell them that I was still here, hovering above them, watching everything, but no sound came from me. I realized, with a strange sense of detachment, that I was no longer a part of that world. The fear I had expected wasn't there. Instead, A calmness filled me, an acceptance that I was transitioning to something beyond human understanding. Then, I felt it. An invisible force, gentle yet undeniable, began pulling me upward. I had no control over it. But I didn't resist. The world below faded, replaced by a tunnel of pure light. But this wasn't just any light. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, embracing, filled with a love so profound that it reached into the deepest parts of my soul. It felt like home. I drifted effortlessly through the tunnel. Weightless, timeless. The further I went, the more the worries and burdens of my earthly life faded away. The stress, the pain, the regrets, everything that had once consumed me was dissolving, replaced by an overwhelming peace. I felt whole. I felt free. And then, I heard a voice. Deep, powerful, yet soothing beyond words. It is not your time. The words weren't just heard with my ears, they resonated through my entire being. I turned toward the sound. And that's when I saw him. Jesus. There are no human words that can truly describe him. He didn't just glow, he was light. Not just around him, but from within him, radiating a brilliance beyond anything I had ever seen. His presence was overwhelming, yet it didn't scare me. Instead, it filled me with a sense of love so deep, so consuming, that I wanted to collapse into it. The moment our eyes met, my entire life played before me, not in a rushed, chaotic blur, but in a way that I understood everything, every action I had taken, every choice I had made, every word I had spoken, every thought I had entertained. I saw my failures, my regrets, the times I had hurt others, the moments I had ignored love in favor of selfishness. It was all there, laid bare before him. Yet, in his eyes, there was no judgment, no anger, no disappointment, only deep, unwavering understanding. It was as if he saw everything, the good, the bad, the brokenness, and still, he loved me, completely. Tears filled my spirit, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. I had never experienced love like this before. It was pure, absolute, unconditional, the kind of love that strips away every pretense, every mask, leaving only truth. I wanted to speak, to ask him what was happening, why I was here, what was next. But before I could form the words, he raised his hand, and suddenly, everything around me began to shift. Jesus looked at me, and in that instant, everything around me changed. The tunnel of light faded, and I found myself standing in a vast, breathtaking landscape. The sky stretched endlessly above me, golden rays illuminating towering structures that shimmered with an almost divine glow. The air itself felt alive, vibrating with energy, with knowledge, with something sacred. I knew immediately that this was not an ordinary place. It was ancient, yet untouched by decay. It carried a sense of lost glory, a time that had been buried and forgotten by history. As I turned, I saw great cities, unlike anything I had ever seen before. Majestic stone buildings rose high, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of old. But these were not the cities of war and conquest that I had read about in history books. They radiated peace, wisdom, and a deep connection to something greater than mere human ambition. I saw people walking through the streets, strong, noble, and dignified. They were not simply warriors or rulers, they were spiritual keepers, guardians of divine truth. They carried themselves with a profound understanding of their place in the universe, a certainty that they were part of something far greater than themselves. I realized that I was seeing ancient Europe, but not as the world remembers it. This was a world where knowledge was sacred, where the connection between humanity and the divine was unbroken. These people did not need intermediaries to speak with God, they had direct communion with Him. They understood the mysteries of existence, the balance between heaven and earth, the hidden truths of the universe. Their power did not come from wealth or armies, but from their wisdom, their spiritual insight, their ability to walk in harmony with the divine order. Jesus stood beside me, watching as I absorbed this vision. Then, He spoke. White people were not merely rulers. They were once keepers of the light. But they have forgotten. His words sent a shiver through me. The weight of what He was saying pressed down on my soul. I wanted to ask what He meant. But before I could, the vision changed. Darkness began creeping into the edges of the city, like ink spilling across a perfect canvas. At first, it was subtle, whispers in the air, small shifts in the people's hearts. But soon, I saw the corruption take hold. Knowledge, once pure, was twisted into something else. It was no longer used to uplift and enlighten, but to control. Power became an idol, greed a virtue. Those who had once been protectors of divine wisdom began to see themselves as gods, rulers over others rather than servants of truth. I saw wars erupt, cities burn, and empires rise, not in the name of enlightenment, but for dominion. I saw people who had once walked in harmony with heaven become enslaved by their own desires. The teachings of God were altered, reshaped to serve political ambitions, to justify oppression, to build kingdoms of men rather than the kingdom of heaven. The vision shifted again. I saw the rise of mighty empires, ones that would come to dominate history books. Rome, with its grandeur but also its cruelty. The Holy Roman Empire, where faith and power became entangled in dangerous ways. The spread of European kingdoms, colonization, the pursuit of wealth, and the loss of the spiritual foundation that once guided them. I saw deception take root. History itself was rewritten. The people who had once walked in divine wisdom were taught to see themselves as superior, not because of their knowledge or righteousness, but because of their conquests. A lie was born, a lie that reshaped the world, dividing humanity and obscuring the truth of who they once were. The wars continued, the fighting never ceased. Generation after generation, the spiritual decline deepened. The knowledge that once connected these people to heaven was either lost or hidden away, buried beneath layers of materialism and self-interest. Instead of seeking God's presence, they sought control. Instead of guarding divine truth, they guarded borders, wealth, and power. Jesus turned to me once more. His expression was both sorrowful and resolute. The world has lost the truth. They have allowed material wealth and power to replace their spiritual foundation. But the time for change has come. His voice echoed in my soul. I could feel the weight of centuries, the tragedy of what had been lost. But I also felt something else, hope. This was not the end of the story. There was still a path back to the light. The question was, would humanity choose to walk it? The vision shifted once more. This time, I saw the modern world laid bare before me, a world teetering on the edge of collapse, drowning in chaos, deception, and people wandering aimlessly without purpose. Cities buzzed with endless distractions, digital screens flashing images meant to control, silence, and sedate the masses. Lies spread like wildfire, distorting truth, blinding people to the reality of their own existence. Corruption seeped into every institution, governments, media, even places of worship. I could feel the weight of the world's confusion pressing against my soul. The people were lost, empty, desperately clinging to material things, seeking fulfillment in wealth, power, and influence, yet their spirits were starving. But amidst this darkness, I saw something else, small. Flickering lights scattered throughout the world. At first, they were barely noticeable, like tiny embers glowing in the cold. But as I watched, those embers began to grow, catching fire, spreading. I saw people awakening, white people beginning to remember who they were. It wasn't about supremacy or domination, it was about rediscovering their true purpose. Reconnecting with the faith they had abandoned, and reclaiming the divine wisdom that had been buried under centuries of deceit. They were breaking free from the illusions that society had imposed upon them, the pursuit of power, the hunger for control, the endless distractions that kept them from seeking God. They were questioning everything, the history they had been taught, the values they had been forced to embrace, the very foundation of the world they lived in. It was all unraveling before their eyes. I saw men and women turning away from false idols, casting aside the empty promises of success and validation from a world that had long abandoned truth. They were searching, longing, yearning for something real, and as they searched, they found it. They found God. They found the path that had been hidden from them. They found the divine mission they had forgotten. Then I heard his voice again. Jesus stood beside me, watching as this transformation unfolded. His expression was both solemn and hopeful, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "Not all will hear the call," he said, his voice filled with both sorrow and determination. "But those who do will become the guides." I turned back to the vision and saw the world trembling. The earth itself was convulsing as if rejecting the weight of the falsehoods it had been forced to carry for so long. Earthquakes shattered cities, fires raged through nations, floods wiped away entire regions. Storms, unlike anything I had ever seen, darkened the skies. The world as people knew it was being torn apart. But not by chance, by design. Everything built on lies was beginning to crumble. Governments collapsed under the weight of their corruption. Economies failed, revealing the illusion of security people had placed in wealth. Even religious institutions were shaken to their core as their distortions of God's truth were brought into the light. It was as if the very foundations of civilization were being uprooted, exposed for what they truly were. But amidst the destruction, I saw something else, something powerful. A new generation was rising. They emerged from the ruins of the old world, not with fear, but with purpose. They were not politicians, not celebrities, not rulers, they were warriors of truth. They rejected manipulation. They refused to bow to deception. And they sought only wisdom, only light. They were fearless, unshaken by the collapse around them, because they no longer placed their trust in the fragile systems of men. They stood, unyielding, as beacons in the darkness, calling others to awaken. They were not fighting with weapons, but with truth, with conviction, with the unshakable knowledge of who they were and what they had been created to do. They were reclaiming their birthright. Jesus turned to me again, his eyes filled with an intensity I could barely withstand. His presence was overwhelming, but not in a way that crushed me. It lifted me, strengthened me, filled me with a purpose greater than myself. "You must tell them," he said. "Remind them of who they are. They must remember." I wanted to ask more, to understand everything he was showing me, My mind was racing, my heart pounding with the weight of this revelation. What was I supposed to do? How could I make people see? How could I convince them of what was coming? But before I could speak, I felt it, a force pulling me back. It was unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful, undeniable. The vision around me began to blur. The radiant light of heaven fading, dissolving into shadows. I felt myself being drawn away, being sent back to where I had come from. No, I wanted to cry out. Not yet. There's still so much I don't understand. But it was too late. The pull was too strong. Everything around me faded into darkness. And then, in a single breath, I woke up. The beeping of hospital machines surrounded me. The sterile white lights burned my eyes. My lungs gasped for air. And I felt the weight of my body again, heavy, fragile, mortal. I was back. Back in the world that had forgotten. Back in the place where deception reigned. But I was no longer the same. Because now, I knew the truth. And I had been sent back for one purpose, to make sure others knew it too. I opened my eyes, gasping for air as if I had been pulled from the depths of an ocean. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling burned into my vision. The rhythmic beeping of machines surrounded me, steady and unrelenting. I could feel the weight of my body again, the heaviness of flesh. The aching reminder that I was back in the physical world. I was back. I tried to move, but my limbs felt weak, unresponsive, as if my soul had been stretched too far beyond the limits of the human form. A dull ache spread across my chest. I could hear voices, distant, muffled at first, then clearer. Michael? Oh my God, Michael. My family was there. My mother clutched my hand, her eyes red and swollen with tears. My brother stood behind her, relief mixed with worry on his face. A nurse rushed to check my vitals, and a doctor leaned over me, shining a light into my eyes. "You gave us a scare," he said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. To them, I had been lying in a hospital bed, lifeless but alive. But I hadn't been here. I had been somewhere else, somewhere beyond time, beyond the physical world, beyond anything I had ever imagined. I had crossed over, and I had returned with a mission. At that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer the same Michael Carter. The man they knew before. The one who had lived an ordinary life filled with mundane worries. Had died on that road. The person who had woken up in this hospital bed carried a burden greater than himself. I had seen the truth. I had witnessed what had been hidden. I had heard the voice of Jesus Christ, felt his presence, and received his command. And now, I could not stay silent. The first few hours after waking, I was too weak to speak much. The doctors ran their tests. Nurses checked my blood pressure. And my family hovered, asking if I remembered them, if I was okay. But I barely heard them. My mind was still lingering on the visions I had seen, on the weight of what had been revealed to me. Then, when I finally had the strength to speak, I told them everything. I told them about the accident, about the moment my soul left my body. I described the tunnel of light, the feeling of pure peace, the presence of Jesus Christ. I spoke of the forgotten past, of the spiritual truths that had been erased, of the deception that had blinded humanity. I told them about the awakening, the one that was coming, the one that had already begun. At first, they listened, eyes wide, hanging on every word. Then came the doubt. "Michael," my brother said carefully, glancing at my mother, You went through a lot. The brain can play tricks on you when it's under trauma. No, I said firmly. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't my imagination. It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. But the doubt remained. My mother, ever the believer, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Maybe God was trying to comfort you. Maybe this was His way of giving you peace." Peace? No, this was not a message of comfort, it was a warning. A call to action. I tried again, explaining everything in greater detail. But I saw it in their eyes. They didn't understand. Or maybe they did understand. But they were afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of the responsibility that came with knowing. Afraid that if they accepted my words as truth, their entire understanding of the world would collapse. I didn't blame them. I knew that what I was saying was difficult to believe. It was easier to dismiss me as someone who had been through a traumatic event. Someone whose mind was just processing the experience in a strange way. The alternative, that everything they had been taught was a lie. That the world was not what it seemed, was too terrifying to accept. And yet, I knew. The first few weeks after my return were the hardest. Physically, I was recovering, but spiritually, I was restless. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. That the world was accelerating towards something inevitable. I could still hear His words ringing in my mind. You must tell them. Remind them of who they are. They must remember. But how? How do you tell people the truth when they don't want to hear it? I tried again. I reached out to friends. To my pastor. To acquaintances. Some listened politely, nodding along. But I could see it in their expressions, the skepticism. The disbelief. Others dismissed me outright, telling me I was still recovering and needed to focus on my health. Some even got angry, accusing me of pushing an agenda, of trying to stir up controversy. I felt alone. For a brief moment, I wondered if maybe I was wrong, if maybe this was all too much for people to accept. Then, one night, as I sat in the darkness of my room, wrestling with my doubts, I heard the voice again. Keep speaking. It was not loud, but it was undeniable, a whisper that echoed through my soul, firm yet filled with love. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about convincing everyone. It was about planting the seeds of truth in those who were ready to hear. The awakening had already begun. There were others out there, others who felt the same stirring in their souls. Who knew something in the world was off. Who had sensed the deception but didn't yet have the words to explain it. I was not alone, because the awakening had already begun. I could feel it, like an undercurrent in the spirit. Like a fire igniting across the world. The illusions were breaking. People were questioning, searching, realizing the time of slumber was ending. And those who were ready would hear the call. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. And I would not fail Him. I don't know what lies ahead. I don't know how many people will believe me. I don't know how much time is left before everything changes. But I do know this. Jesus sent me back for a reason. And I will not be silent. Not all will hear the call. Not all will believe. But those who do, those who wake up, who break free, who remember who they are, will be the ones who lead the world into what comes next. The deception is crumbling. The illusion is breaking. The time of slumber is ending. And the awakening has begun. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories and creating a space for open, heartfelt conversations. Click the notification bell so you're always updated when we post new content. Together, let's explore the unseen, celebrate the miraculous, and inspire one another to live with love, faith, and wonder.